I never imagined my grandfather's death would reveal so much about my family. After he passed, everyone kept telling me Grandpa left nothing with such certainty that I started to doubt my own memories. But something felt off about their confidence. The way they avoided eye contact when discussing the will, the hushed conversations that stopped when I entered rooms. My gut told me there was more to this story than what my family was sharing, and I was right. If you are watching this now, I would love to know where you are tuning in from. Drop a comment below, hit that like button, and subscribe to hear more stories about family secrets that changed lives forever. Now let me tell you how I discovered what my grandfather really left behind. Growing up, I had a special relationship with my grandfather, Harold Thompson. He was a self-made businessman who built his manufacturing company from scratch after returning from military service. Despite his success, he lived in the same modest, two-story house he had purchased in the 70s. He drove the same truck for 20 years and wore the same style of flannel shirts until they were threadbare. Every weekend, from the time I was 8 until I left for college, I would visit him. We would sit on his back porch drinking lemonade in summer or hot chocolate in winter, and he would tell me stories about his life. He taught me about business responsibility and, most importantly, integrity. "Michael," he would say, "a man with integrity sleeps well at night. Remember that." Our favorite activity was fishing at a small lake about 30 minutes from his house. It was our special spot tucked away behind a grove of oak trees. We would sit for hours, sometimes catching nothing, but always talking about everything. The fishing is just an excuse to think he would tell me. Some of my best business decisions came to me while waiting for a bass to bite. My grandfather owned Thompson Manufacturing, which produced specialized parts for agricultural equipment. The business employed over 200 people in our community and had annual revenues in the millions. Yet you would never know it from the way he lived. The rest of my family was quite different. My father, James, always felt entitled to the family wealth. He worked at the company, but spent more time playing golf than in the office. He constantly complained about my grandfather's stinginess and how he should be enjoying the fruits of the family business more. My uncle Roger helped run the company's finances, but had a gambling problem that everyone knew about but never discussed openly. Several times, my grandfather had bailed him out of debt, always with the warning that it was the last time. My cousin Patrick, Uncle Roger's son, expected to inherit control of the business, despite having never worked there a day in his life. He had dropped out of 3 colleges and was currently finding himself while living in my uncle's pool house at 32. Aunt Diane, my grandfather's only daughter, had borrowed large sums from him over the years to fund a series of failed business ventures, from a boutique that closed after 6 months to a catering service that ended with a lawsuit from food poisoning victims. She never repaid any of the loans. The only other family member who seemed to share my values was my sister Amanda. 4 years younger than me, she had always stayed neutral in family matters, focusing instead on her medical studies. While I had gone into accounting, she was finishing her residency at a hospital across the country. The last few months of my grandfather's life were difficult. He had been diagnosed with late-stage cancer, and the decline was swift. I visited him in the hospital almost daily, while other family members rarely showed up. When they did, it was brief and uncomfortable. During one of my last visits, we had a private conversation where he seemed to want to tell me something important. He gripped my hand with surprising strength for someone so ill. "Michael," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "things aren't always what they seem. Remember our fishing spot?" Before he could say more, a nurse came in to adjust his medication, and he drifted off to sleep. I never got to hear what else he wanted to tell me. 3 days later, he passed away peacefully in his sleep. After his death, the family's behavior changed. Suddenly, everyone was interested in his affairs. There were hushed conversations that stopped when I entered rooms. I overheard phrases like, "The will is taken care of, and he will never know," The funeral was lavish, something my grandfather would have hated. My father and uncle spared no expense, which seemed odd given how they had always criticized my grandfather's penny pinching. It felt more like a performance than a memorial. After the service, family members were already discussing selling the business and property. My father mentioned a developer who was interested in the land where the factory stood. Uncle Roger talked about a competitor who might buy the company. But what about the employees, I asked. What about grandfather's legacy? Business is business, my father said dismissively. Besides, there is nothing in writing that says we need to keep it running. I was confused by their confidence. When I asked about the will, they all gave the same answer. Grandpa left nothing specific. It all goes to the family to decide. Something did not feel right. I tried to speak with my grandfather's lawyer, Mr. Franklin, but my calls went unanswered. When I mentioned this to my father, he said, "Franklin is busy with other clients. Besides, there is nothing to discuss. Roger has seen the will, and there is nothing for anyone specifically." The days before the official reading of the will were tense. My relatives were suddenly overly nice to me, suggesting I move on from expecting anything specific from my grandfather. "He loved you, sure," my father said during a family dinner, "but sentiment does not equal inheritance. Be realistic, son." Despite their assurances, I could not shake the feeling that something was wrong. While helping clean out my grandfather's home office, I found paperwork that suggested substantial assets not mentioned in any family discussions. When I asked Uncle Roger about them, he quickly took the papers from me. "Just old documents," he said. "Nothing current. I will make sure these are properly filed." The night before the will reading, I could not sleep. I kept thinking about my grandfather's last words to me. "Remember our fishing spot." What had he been trying to tell me? The law office of Franklin and Associates was housed in a stately brick building downtown. The conference room where we gathered had dark wood paneling and leather chairs that squeaked when you shifted your weight. Family portraits of the Franklin legal dynasty watched over us from heavy gold frames. My father, uncle, aunt, and cousin all arrived together 15 minutes late. They entered with an air of confident nonchalance that seemed rehearsed. My father nodded to Mr. Sloof, Franklin, as if they were old friends, though my grandfather had always said, "Mr." Franklin barely tolerated my father. "Shall we get this formality over with?" my father said, as he took a seat at the large oval table. "Some of us have real business to attend to today." Mr. Franklin was a tall, thin man in his 60s with wire-rimmed glasses and a perpetual frown. He had been my grandfather's lawyer and friend for over 40 years. Today, he seemed uncomfortable, clearing his throat repeatedly as he arranged papers before him. A younger lawyer, whom Mr. Bexaston Franklin introduced as Mr. Carter, sat slightly behind him with a leather portfolio. Mr. Carter kept glancing at me with an expression I could not quite read. "We are gathered today to read the last will and testament of Harold James Thompson." Mr. Franklin began formally. He adjusted his glasses and began reading from a document. The will was surprisingly simple and brief. It stated that the entirety of my grandfather's estate, including the business properties and investments, was to be donated to a list of charities with a small stipend for each family member. There was a moment of silence after Mr. Franklin finished reading. Then my relatives erupted in a chorus of well-rehearsed disappointment. "This is outrageous. He cannot do this. There must be some mistake." But their protests lacked genuine shock. Their eyes did not show surprise, and my father even checked his watch as he complained. It was as if they were going through motions they had practiced. I sat in stunned silence. This did not sound like my grandfather at all. He had always talked about legacy and family responsibility. Why would he give everything away? As the manufactured outrage continued, I noticed Mr. Franklin seemed increasingly uncomfortable. He kept glancing at Mr. Carter, who subtly nodded toward a brown envelope on the table. Are there any questions? Mr. Franklin finally asked when the protests died down. My relatives began gathering their things, seemingly eager to leave, despite their supposed outrage. Actually, yes, I said, finding my voice. I find this very strange. Grandfather always talked about keeping the business in the family. He was preparing me to understand it. Why would he suddenly change his mind? My father laughed dismissively. Your fishing trips and chats hardly qualified as business training, son. Father clearly had a change of heart. Probably got religious at the end. These things happen. But what about his personal items? I pressed. The fishing gear, his journals, the photographs. My uncle waved his hand. We will divide those up fairly. Do not worry. And what about the property at Oak Ridge? I asked, naming a parcel of land I had found in the documents which no one had mentioned before. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. My father and uncle exchanged glances. What property? My aunt asked sharply. There is no property at Oak Ridge, my uncle said firmly. Mr. Franklin was staring at me intently now. Mr. Carter had slipped a note in front of him, which he quickly read. Is there anything else my grandfather might have left? I asked directly. Any other documents or messages? Absolutely not, my father said, standing up. This meeting is over. We accept the will, as read, unfortunate as it is. Thank you for your time, Mr. Franklin. The family began moving toward the door, but I remained seated. Something was very wrong, and I was not leaving until I understood what. What about our fishing spot? I said loudly. Mr. Franklin froze. My relatives stopped their exit. What did you say, Mr. Franklin asked quietly. My grandfather told me to remember our fishing spot, I repeated, in the hospital, just before he died. He said, things aren't always what they seem. Mr. Franklin and Mr. Carter exchanged looks. My father marched back to the table. This is ridiculous, he sputtered. We are not going to entertain the delusions of an old man on his deathbed. But Mr. Franklin had pulled the brown envelope toward him. Actually, he said, his voice stronger now, there is something else. What is that? Uncle Roger demanded. We were never informed of any other documents. This envelope, Mr. Franklin explained, contains additional instructions from Harold. He specifically directed that it should only be opened if certain questions were asked at this meeting. What questions? My aunt asked, her voice shrill. Questions about the fishing spot, Mr. Franklin replied, looking directly at me. Harold said that only the right person would know to ask. The room erupted in chaos. My father lunged for the envelope, but Mr. Carter smoothly intercepted him. This is a legal proceeding, Mr. Carter said calmly. Interference would be unwise. This is absurd, my father shouted. Any additional documents would have required proper legal notification. Not necessarily, Mr. Franklin replied, breaking the seal on the envelope. This is a personal codicil, properly witnessed and notarized, with specific instructions for its revelation. He removed several papers and a small USB drive from the envelope. My relatives watched in visible panic as he adjusted his glasses and began to read. I, Harold James Thompson, being of sound mind, declare this to be a codicil to my last will and testament. If this document is being read, it means that Michael has asked about our fishing spot as I trusted he would. My heart pounded. As Mr. Franklin continued, I have reason to believe that certain family members may attempt to conceal or alter my true wishes after my death. Therefore, I have created this secure addendum to ensure my actual desires are honored. My father's face had turned a dangerous shade of red. Uncle Roger gripped the back of a chair so hard his knuckles were white. The will that was just read is not my true will. It is a decoy created with Mr. Franklin's cooperation to expose those who would dishonor my legacy. Mr. Franklin paused, taking a deep breath before continuing. My actual wishes are as follows. Thompson Manufacturing is to be divided with 60% ownership transferred to my grandson. Michael, 20% to my granddaughter Amanda, and 20% to be held in trust for the benefit of company employees. A strangled sound came from my cousin Patrick. Aunt Diane had sunk into a chair, her face ashen. My primary residence and all personal effects are to be given to Michael, who has shown true appreciation for their sentimental value. My investment portfolio is to be divided with 50% to Michael, 30% to Amanda, and 20% to the charitable causes listed in Appendix A. Mr. Franklin turned the page and continued. Most importantly, any family member found to have participated in an attempt to conceal, alter, or misrepresent my wishes is to be specifically disinherited, receiving only the legally mandated minimum required by state law. My father slammed his fist on the table. This is fraud. A forgery. We will contest this immediately. Mr. Franklin held up the USB drive. Harold anticipated your reaction, James. This drive contains recorded evidence of conversations in which certain family members discussed plans to suppress his true will. It also contains video testimony from Harold himself, recorded 3 weeks before his death, explaining his decisions and identifying those he believed were conspiring against his wishes. You cannot prove anything Uncle Roger said, but his voice lacked conviction. Actually, Mr. Carter spoke up, rising from his seat. We can. I should introduce myself properly. While I am indeed a member of this firm, I was also hired separately by Harold Thompson as a private investigator 6 months ago when he first suspected someone was accessing his personal files without authorization. This revelation hit like a thunderbolt. My grandfather had known all along that something was wrong. I have documented multiple instances of unauthorized access to Harold's home office, tampering with his personal papers, and recorded conversations between family members discussing plans to, and I quote, make sure Michael gets nothing. Aunt Diane suddenly burst into tears. It was not my idea, she wailed. James and Roger said, we all deserved more than Michael. They said Harold was not thinking clearly because of his medication. Shut up, Diane, my father snapped. Why should I? She shot back, her composure completely broken. You promised we would all share equally if we helped convince Dad to change his will. You said Michael was too young and naive to run the business. Patrick jumped in, unable to contain his anger. You said I would get to be CEO, you promised. The room descended into a flurry of accusations as my relatives turned on each other, inadvertently revealing more details of their conspiracy. I sat in shocked silence, the full extent of their betrayal washing over me in waves of disbelief. Mr. Franklin raised his voice above the chaos. Enough. This behavior only confirms Harold's concerns. Security cameras were installed in Harold's hospital room at his request, which recorded family members searching his personal belongings while he was sedated. He turned to me, his expression softening. Michael, your grandfather was very clear about his wishes. He trusted you not only with his business, but with his legacy of integrity. The document Mr. Carter is holding is the actual legally binding will. The document I read earlier was created by your grandfather as what he called a truth serum to expose those who might try to interfere with his true intentions. I could barely process what was happening. The family I had grown up with, shared holidays with, had conspired to rob me of my inheritance, and more importantly, to betray my grandfather's dying wishes. You will not get away with this, my father hissed at me. We will challenge it in court. We will drag this out for years. Mr. Franklin shook his head. I would advise against that course of action, James. The evidence is overwhelming, and pursuing a fraudulent claim would only expose you to criminal charges. The will is clear. Those who attempted to interfere receive only the statutory minimum. One by one, my relatives stormed out, hurling threats and accusations. My father was the last to leave, pausing at the door to deliver a final blow. You may have won today, but you are no longer my son. Do not expect a place at our table ever again. The door slammed behind him, leaving me alone with Mr. Franklin and Mr. Carter in a suddenly quiet room. "I am very sorry, Michael, Mr. Franklin said after a moment. "Your grandfather feared this might happen, but he hoped he was wrong." I stared at the papers before me, documents that proved my family had never really been the people I thought they were. "There is one more thing," Mr. Carter said, reaching into his briefcase. He pulled out a sealed envelope with my name written in my grandfather's distinctive handwriting. He asked that this be given to you privately after everything else was revealed. The weeks following the will reading were a blur of legal meetings, paperwork, and emotional turmoil. True to their word, my father and uncle filed challenges to the will, but their case fell apart when Mr. Stockton's Carter presented the evidence he had gathered. The judge not only dismissed their claims, but referred the matter to the district attorney's office for potential fraud charges. Bank records revealed unauthorized transfers from my grandfather's accounts after he became too ill to monitor his finances. My uncle had diverted nearly $300,000 to cover gambling debts. My father had been siphoning company funds through inflated expense reports for years. The fake will they had planned to submit would have allowed them to liquidate the company assets and disappear with millions. The legal consequences were swift and severe. Both my father and uncle faced criminal charges for attempting to defraud the estate. The court ordered restitution of all funds taken and permanently barred them from any involvement with Thompson Manufacturing. Aunt Diane and Cousin Patrick received only the legally mandated inheritance, which in our state amounted to a token sum. I found myself suddenly in control of a multi-million-dollar business with over 200 employees counting on me. It was overwhelming. But as I dug into the company records, I discovered my grandfather had been preparing me more thoroughly than I realized. The fishing trips and casual conversations had actually been carefully structured lessons in business ethics and management philosophy. The questions he asked about hypothetical scenarios were based on real situations the company had faced. He had been grooming me all along, but in a way that felt natural and unforced. In his office safe, I found a leather-bound journal addressed to me. Each entry corresponded to a date we had spent together, outlining the business principles he had been subtly teaching me. The final entry, dated just a week before his hospitalization, read, "Michael is ready. He just doesn't know it yet." The true value of what I inherited was not the money or the business, but my grandfather's wisdom and foresight. He had seen the character of each family member clearly and had planned accordingly. The betrayal still hurt deeply, but his faith in me provided a foundation to build upon. My sister Amanda returned for the legal proceedings, equally shocked by our family's behavior. Though she had no interest in running the business, preferring to focus on her medical career, she fully supported my decisions and provided a sounding board when I needed one. Mr. Franklin became a valued advisor and shared stories about my grandfather that helped me understand him better. Many of the employees had known my grandfather for decades and welcomed me with open arms, sharing their own perspectives on his leadership style. One Saturday, about a month after the will reading, I drove out to the fishing spot my grandfather and I had frequented. It was a small hidden lake that required a hike through dense woods to reach. We had spent countless hours on its shores, talking about life, business, and the future. Near our usual sitting place, I found a waterproof container tucked into a hollow tree trunk that had served as our makeshift table. Inside was a letter, handwritten by my grandfather. "Michael," it began, "if you are reading this, then things have gone as I feared they might. I am sorry for the pain this has likely caused you, but not for my decision to entrust you with everything I have built. You have something that cannot be taught or bought: integrity." The letter continued, explaining how he had watched each family member reveal their true character over the years. He had seen my father's entitlement, my uncle's dishonesty, my aunt's irresponsibility, and my cousin's laziness. But he had also seen my consistency, work ethic, and genuine care for others. "The money and the business are just things," he wrote. "What matters is what you do with them. I built this company to support families, to create something lasting, and worthwhile. I know you understand that. The others only see dollar signs. His final words brought tears to my eyes. I am proud of the man you have become, Michael. Whatever happens, remember that a man with integrity sleeps well at night. I love you, son, more than you will ever know. Over the following months, I implemented changes at Thompson Manufacturing that I believed would have made my grandfather proud. I established a profit-sharing program for longtime employees and created a foundation in his name to support local education initiatives, something he had always believed in strongly. The company not only survived, but thrived under the new structure. Some employees later told me they had been preparing resumes, fearing what would happen if my father and uncle took over. Instead, morale improved, productivity increased, and we expanded into new markets my grandfather had been considering before his illness. As for my family, the legal consequences of their actions effectively ended our relationship. My father and uncle were given probation and ordered to perform community service in addition to financial restitution. They moved to Florida, supposedly to start over. Aunt Diane occasionally sent tentative emails asking to reconnect, but always with thinly veiled requests for money attached. Cousin Patrick disappeared to Europe on what remained of his trust fund. Only Amanda remained close visiting when her medical schedule allowed. During one such visit as we sat on my grandfather's back porch now, my porch, she asked if I regretted discovering the truth. Wouldn't it have been easier to just believe Grandpa left nothing, she wondered. You would still have your relationship with Dad and the others. I thought about it for a long moment before answering. A relationship built on lies isn't really a relationship at all, I said finally. Grandpa taught me that integrity means doing the right thing even when it is hard, especially when it is hard. I would rather know the painful truth than live with a comfortable lie. She nodded, understanding. He would be proud of you, you know. Really proud. Looking back now, I realize that what appeared to be the worst moment of my life that day in the lawyer's office was actually the beginning of something better. My grandfather's final lesson was his most important. True wealth is not measured in dollars, but in the strength of your character and the honesty of your actions. I still go fishing at our spot, and sometimes I imagine him sitting beside me, nodding in approval, as I tell him about the business decisions I have made. In those quiet moments, I feel rich beyond measure, not because of what I inherited, but because of who I learned to be. What would you have done in my situation? Would you have fought for the truth, or accepted what seemed inevitable? I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story touched you in any way, please give it a like, share it with someone who might need to hear it, and subscribe for more real-life stories about family legacy and discovering what truly matters. Thank you for listening, and remember that sometimes the most valuable inheritances cannot be measured in dollars and cents.